He stood there, pulled out a checkbook, and wrote a number no one could believe, then quietly walked away. No explanation, no TV cameras, no one knew why. Until the girl behind the art stall burst into tears, and the story exploded across America. It started like any other ordinary day, a noisy street corner, a young woman trying to sell paintings to pay for chemotherapy, and hundreds of people passing by as if she didn't exist. But then one person stopped, just one. And he didn't just buy a painting, he bought her a chance to live. As Matthew Nolan walked along the crowded sidewalk of a busy street in downtown New York, no one in the rushing crowd recognized him. A tall man in a worn leather jacket, a cowboy hat pulled low over half his face. He looked just like any other passerby, quiet, unremarkable. But then he stopped, in front of a small, humble art stall where a young woman sat quietly behind an old wooden table, her hands still stained with paint, her eyes tired, but they lit up when she saw someone actually stop. No one knew that moment, a moment that seemed so ordinary, would change everything. Because that girl, Emily Graves, wasn't just selling paintings, she was fighting to survive. Each brushstroke wasn't just a piece of art, but a prayer, painted with color, hope, and silent desperation. And the man who stopped at her stall wasn't just another passerby. He was Matthew Nolan, a screen legend, a man whose gaze alone could quiet an entire theater. But that day, he wasn't seeking attention. He just wanted to really see a painting. And then, in true Matthew Nolan fashion, quiet, firm, without fanfare, he didn't just buy a painting. He changed her future. 3 weeks before that moment, Emily sat quietly on a hospital bed, where pale fluorescent lights cast a cold glow on sterile walls, and the sharp scent of disinfectant clung to the air. Across the table, Dr. Khanna adjusted his glasses, his voice low as he delivered the update. The medication is working, but you'll need at least 2 more rounds of chemotherapy. Emily didn't react. She was used to news like this, used to the never-ending exhaustion, used to living without knowing how much time she had left. But this time, something was different. Money. No more insurance, no more loans. Her mother's hands were clenched so tightly, the knuckles turned white. Her father said, "Everything will be okay." But his voice was hoarse, as if he was trying to believe something he couldn't even say to himself. On the way home, no one spoke. The car moved, but the silence stayed. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay still, hand on her chest, her heartbeat pounding like it was trying to jolt her mind out of numbness. She couldn't watch her parents give everything they had just to keep her alive. She didn't want to be the reason her family broke. And then, as the first light of morning crept through the window, Emily knew what she had to do. She wouldn't wait for a miracle. She'd make one herself. With old tubes of paint, a few leftover canvases, and a kind of determination no one could take from her, she started to paint. Not for fame, not for pity, but to fight, to survive. And every brushstroke on that canvas, from soft blues to bold streaks of orange, was her only way to push back against what was eating her alive. When she set up her tiny art stall on the street 3 days later, under the harsh sun, and in the middle of an indifferent crowd, she wasn't expecting anything grand. Just this. If someone stopped, if they saw something of value in her paintings, maybe she could afford one more round of chemo. Just a little hope, no matter how small. The first few days dragged on as if time itself was stretching out her helplessness. Emily sat for hours on a folding chair, her back aching, her head spinning from the meds, her hands trembling every time she tried to steady the brush on canvas. The wooden table in front of her had been arranged early that morning by her mother. Paintings neatly lined up with a small handwritten sign, "Original Art. Each piece is a piece of hope. All proceeds go toward cancer treatment." She had thought, if she was honest enough, if people saw what she was trying to do, they would stop. They would understand. But reality was colder. People walked past her like they'd walk past a traffic light that had just turned red. No glance back, no words spoken. Some gave quick glances, their eyes flickering with a hint of sympathy, but kept walking as if kindness was best kept in thought. A well-dressed woman in a navy blazer paused for a few seconds, eyeing a sunset painting, offered a strained smile, then walked away in silence. A man in a suit and sunglasses read the sign carefully, his expression briefly thoughtful, but when Emily smiled hopefully, he simply shook his head and walked off. By midday on the third day, the heat was rising off the asphalt in waves. Emily reached shakily for a water bottle, her hands smeared with paint, her lips dry and cracked from thirst and fatigue. Sweat ran down her back and her head spun. The anti-nausea meds had stopped working, but she stayed. She sat. She waited, like someone standing guard over her own life. Then an elderly couple stopped. The woman, with silver hair and a canvas tote, bent down to look closely at a painting of a desert sky in deep violet hues, streaked with gold like fading memories. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her fingertip brushing the edge of the frame, as if afraid to break something fragile. "How much for this one, dear?" Emily clasped her hands tightly on her knees, trying to steady her voice. $80. They looked at each other briefly. The husband nodded. "We'll take it." For a moment, Emily thought she had misheard. She froze, heart pounding, hands fumbling to find a paper bag to wrap the painting, every movement stiff and mechanical. When the bill was placed into her hand, a wave of emotion hit. Not quite joy, not quite relief, but something deeper, quieter. The feeling that, for the first time in months, her effort hadn't been ignored, that someone had truly seen her. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She painted. Her eyes were heavy, but her hands had found their rhythm again. The colors were darker now, the details sharper, and for the first time, she allowed something into her paintings that she had always held back. Her pain. She painted fear, weakness. The days curled up in a hospital bed as chemo burned through her veins like fire. But she also painted hope. Small moments, light slipping through the curtain, her mother quietly massaging her shoulders, the scent of ink mixing with tears. Each painting after that night was deeper, more real, and even if no one else stopped again, she knew. She wasn't painting just to survive. She was painting to exist as herself. On the morning of the fourth day, a middle-aged woman stopped by. Floral dress, softly curled brown hair, a gentle voice. She read the sign, then looked at Emily. "You're very brave." Emily smiled, like she had so many times before. "Thank you for stopping." The woman lingered a moment longer, her eyes full of regret. "I wish I could help, but I'm struggling too." She didn't buy anything, but stayed long enough to say, "You're a fighter, you know that?" Emily nodded, but inside it felt different. The word fighter sounded too noble. She didn't feel strong, she just felt tired and alone. Then came a man, maybe 40, slicked back hair, leather jacket, walking with too much confidence. He looked at her paintings for a few seconds, then said, "Nobody buys originals anymore. You should sell prints or get on TikTok." Emily clenched her hands under the table. She'd met people like him too many times, the kind who thought they understood life better than everyone else. She didn't need advice. She needed belief. "I just need to fight," she replied, softly but firmly. The man shrugged and walked off. That afternoon, the sky began to cloud over. Emily leaned on the table, eyes half closed. The nausea had returned. Her stomach was empty. But she didn't leave. She sat in the ache and the quiet heartbreak. 3 paintings sold. Still far too little for what she was facing. Sometimes she wondered, was she being unrealistic? Was she just a sick, stubborn girl clinging to something no one else believed in? She didn't know that just a few hours later, everything would change. Someone was walking toward her, someone who wouldn't ask, "How much is this?" But instead, "What's the story behind these paintings?" That late afternoon, as the sun began to soften and its last golden rays stretched diagonally across the pavement, Emily thought it would be just like the past 3 days. Another afternoon of waiting, another walk home with untouched paintings. She had just started packing up when a young woman's voice called out from in front of the table. "Did you paint this?" Emily looked up. Standing before her was a petite woman in her late 20s, wearing a cropped khaki jacket and a canvas backpack. Her brown hair was tied neatly back, and pinned to her chest was a name tag with a small logo, Urban Arts Review. Her face wasn't filled with pity. It showed genuine curiosity. "All of them are mine," Emily replied, cautiously, but with a hint of surprise. The woman leaned in to study a sunset cityscape, eyes lighting up like a child seeing something beautiful for the first time. "Wow, it's stunning. I'm Jenna. I write for a small art blog. I usually feature indie or street artists. Would you mind if I took some photos?" Emily froze. "You want to take pictures?" Jenna nodded. "Yes, of the paintings, and of you too, and if you're okay with it, I'd love to write about the story behind them." Emily wasn't sure if this was real, but she nodded gently, afraid that if she nodded too eagerly, the opportunity might vanish. Over the next 10 minutes, Jenna photographed each painting, every handwritten sign, Emily's paint-stained hands, and her awkward, surprised smile. She worked quickly, professionally. No fuss, no vague promises. But when she slipped her phone back into her bag, she sat on the empty folding chair beside Emily and asked, "Would you tell me?" "All of it." Emily hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. Not dramatized, not drawn out, just the truth. The illness, the chemotherapy, the cost, the fear of watching her parents age under pressure, sleepless nights, the decision to paint as a last resort. Jenna didn't interrupt. She didn't nod excessively. She just listened, really listened. When Emily finished, Jenna closed her notebook and stood up. "This story deserves to be known," she said gently, "and I'll help make sure it is." Emily didn't dare hope. She had heard promises before, but something felt lighter, that feeling of being seen, understood, not as a sick girl asking for money, but as an artist, a person. The next morning, as Emily set up her stall like any other day, the first thing she noticed was someone already waiting. A middle-aged woman holding a coffee cup, eyes full of intention. "I read the article," she said before Emily could even greet her. "I'd like to buy a painting." Before Emily could respond, the woman pointed to a piece in blazing gold and burnt orange. "How much for this one?" Emily stammered, $85. The woman pulled out her wallet, handed her $100, and simply smiled as Emily scrambled to find change. "Keep it. Thank you for sharing your story." Within the next hour, 3 more people stopped. A young couple debated for a while before picking 2 smaller paintings, one of a sunset, one of a rainy cityscape. An art student passed by, pausing only to say, "Your story's inspiring. I don't have money, but I hope you live long enough to paint 100 more." Emily wanted to hug every single one of them. Her heart pounded. For the first time in days of sitting alone, the world had answered. And not with pity, but with appreciation. Around noon, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Lucas, her best friend from high school. "Emily, click this link. Now." She opened it. It was Jenna's article. The title, "Fighting with Color, the Girl Who Paints to Stay Alive." Below it, a photo of Emily, her table, the handwritten sign, and the quiet cowboy painting tucked in the corner of the frame. The article was being shared by the thousands. At the bottom was a donation link, not something Emily had requested, but something Jenna had thoughtfully asked to include. Comments poured in. "I'm a cancer survivor too. You made me feel less alone." "Sending what I can, stay strong." "Please, I want to buy a painting, any one of them." Emily sat still for a while. Her hand rested on her chest, not to hold back tears, but to feel something clearly. That what she had poured into every brushstroke, fear, hope, life, had finally reached somewhere far beyond her own corner of the world. And just when she thought this was already a miracle, she had no idea. The most important figure hadn't arrived yet. He was on his way, hands tucked in the pockets of a worn leather jacket, cowboy hat low over his face, walking slowly through the crowd. No phone, no fanfare, just his eyes, looking straight at the paintings, and seeing something few ever did. Emily didn't recognize him right away. There were too many people passing by, too many faces that came and went, and she was busy reorganizing her paintings after the morning's unexpected sales, something she'd never thought she'd be doing so often. But then, something in the air shifted, a strange kind of stillness, as if the world had just turned its volume all the way down. No more honking, no more footsteps clattering on the pavement, just a quiet, solid presence. And then she saw him. A tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn brown leather jacket. A weathered cowboy hat hid half his face. He stood there, saying nothing. He didn't rush past like everyone else. He looked at the paintings, but not just looked, studied them. Slowly, intently, as if each piece was a doorway into a story he already knew or had once lived. Emily still didn't realize who he was. To her, at that moment, he was just a strange older man with a rare kind of gaze, not invasive, not curious, but deeply compassionate. She cleared her throat, a little hoarse from talking all morning. "Can I help you with something, sir?" He didn't answer right away. His sharp blue eyes that, if she had looked closer, she might have recognized from hundreds of appearances on the big screen, stayed fixed on a single painting, a black and white desert landscape with a lone figure standing against the vast emptiness. A wide-brimmed hat hid the figure's face, their back turned to the viewer. He pointed. "Who painted this one?" His voice was low, a bit raspy, dusted with time. Emily swallowed. "I did. All of these are mine." He nodded slowly. "So, what's the story behind it?" Emily blinked. Most people just asked for prices. Very few asked why. She looked at him more carefully. The sun-worn skin, deep creases on his brow, a scruffy silver beard. And then something clicked, like an old photograph falling out of a forgotten drawer in her mind. "Wasn't this?" But before the thought fully formed, she answered, "I painted it during my third round of chemo. My body felt like it was on fire, but my mind was blank. And in that blankness, I imagined myself somewhere else, a faraway place, silent and empty. No doctors, no needles, no pain, just quiet, and a little bit of control." Her voice wasn't shaky, wasn't emotional. It was just honest. The man stood still, then gave a small nod. "Alone, but free," he said, almost to himself. "Yes," Emily replied. "I think that's what I wanted." He lifted the painting in both hands, not carelessly, not like a casual buyer, but as if holding something important. "I'll take this one," he said. Emily nodded, not thinking much of it. "That one is $200. But instead of reaching for a wallet, he pulled out a small, slightly worn leather notebook. A checkbook. Emily blinked. She hadn't seen anyone carry a checkbook in years, let alone use one. She thought he was joking, but he opened it, carefully wrote something down, and tore the check from the pad. When he handed it to her, time seemed to freeze. Her hand reached out, brushing the edge of the paper, her eyes scanning the numbers. And then her heart felt like it stopped. The last 3 digits blurred her vision. She thought she read it wrong. Not $200. Not $2,000, $50,000. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She nearly dropped the check. This must be a mistake." He shook his head, slowly and firmly. "No mistake. That's the amount." She took a half step back, chest heaving, her hands shaking like they couldn't hold on to something so small, and yet so overwhelming. "I can't accept this. He looked her straight in the eye. And for the first time, his face was fully visible. That look, the one that had silenced movie theaters, faced down villains, held justice, steady in countless westerns. Emily froze. She didn't need a name. She knew exactly who he was. "Matthew Nolan," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly, gave a faint smile, the kind that millions would never forget. "You're very good," he said, "and I'm not donating. I'm buying a painting." A soft wave of dizziness swept through her. She sat down in her chair, still holding the check like it might vanish at any second. In that moment, she didn't hear anything else. No traffic, no footsteps, no rush of life around her, just her heartbeat. And the truth resting in her hands. A painting, a man, a moment. And from here on out, everything had changed. At first, no one noticed. The city moved as it always did. Rushed, chaotic, indifferent. People stayed glued to their phones, headphones in, heads down. A few glanced at the tiny art stall, at the thin girl behind it, whose eyes still hadn't fully processed what had just happened. Emily sat frozen, arms wrapped tightly around the check, as if loosening her grip even a little would make it all vanish, like a dream upon waking. Matthew Nolan still stood there, calm, silent, hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, eyes watching the world, as if nothing mattered more than having just chosen a beautiful painting. But then, the inevitable happened. A teenage boy jogging by slowed as he passed, ready to keep moving, until his eyes caught a familiar face beneath the cowboy hat. He stopped, frowned, stepped back, then turned fully around. Pulling out his earbuds, he said, not loud, but just loud enough for the air to shift. "Wait, is that him?" A woman nearby turned instinctively. She squinted, then called out to her friend, "Lisa, look. Is that Matthew Nolan?" And like a row of dominoes, it began. A third person paused. A fourth aimed their phone. A fifth asked, "What's going on?" And then, like an unstoppable change in the wind, a crowd began to form. One voice rang out clearly, "Oh my God, it is him! It's Matthew Nolan!" A woman with glasses raised her phone and started recording. A group of college students rushed over to the art stall like they were being pulled by a magnetic force. Voices rose. Why is he here? Is he buying that painting? Is this real? What did he give her? All eyes turned to the small table and the two people who had just shared the quietest moment in the entire city, up until now. Emily still hadn't fully grasped what was happening. She looked up and saw eyes, dozens of them, then hundreds. Phones pointed at her, Matthew Nolan's face appearing on screen after screen. Someone called out, "Did he really just buy one of your paintings?" Another person elbowed forward, "For how much?" Emily didn't know whether to answer or stay quiet, but when a middle-aged man caught sight of the number on the check in her hand, he froze, eyes wide, then gasped, $50,000? Oh my God. And that was it. The crowd erupted, shouts, cheers, people rushing toward the table. Someone yelled, "I want to buy a painting. Do you have any left?" A young man in a blue polo shirt ran up, pointing at a nightscape. "How much is this one?" "I'll take it." A woman clutching a child looked at Emily with shining eyes. "Please, I want one for my husband. He's going through cancer treatment too." Before Emily could catch her breath, 4 or 5 more people were flipping through the paintings. No one bargained, no one asked too many questions. They weren't buying art, they were bringing hope home. Beside her, Matthew Nolan still stood, observing it all with quiet composure, as if he had known this would happen all along. Then he leaned in, his voice low and gravelly, that unmistakable voice, and said, "Told you. Just keep painting, kid." With a small nod, he turned and walked away, stepping through the chaotic crowd like a man who had just finished his final scene. No spotlight, no applause, just the echo of a moment that had changed everything. Emily couldn't believe it. Minutes ago, she was just an unknown girl with 3 paintings sold and a fistful of fragile hope. Now, she was sitting in the middle of a spontaneous media storm, with people lining up, with teary smiles and outstretched hands from strangers who, somehow, felt like they knew her heart through her work. By that afternoon, not a single painting remained on the table. She sold everything. And for the first time since the hospital handed her a chemo schedule, Emily wasn't thinking about the next bill. She was thinking about his eyes, that quiet, unwavering gaze, and the words he left her with. Just keep painting, kid. She knew one thing for certain. He hadn't come to save her. He came to believe in her. And to Emily, that was worth more than any miracle. That night, when Emily got home, she could barely feel her body. Not from exhaustion, but because her heart still hadn't slowed down. Everything was moving too fast, compared to the life she had gotten used to. Her mother opened the door, startled at the sight of Emily clutching a pile of empty bags, the ones that had once held her paintings, now completely gone. Before she could ask anything, Emily held out the check. Her mother's hands trembled as she looked at the number. Silence hung for a few long seconds. Then she sank to the floor, covered her face, and couldn't say a word. Her father came out from the kitchen, his eyes still carrying the same familiar tiredness, until he saw the signature at the bottom of the check. Matthew Nolan? He asked, voice cracking with disbelief and emotion. He didn't need to ask anything else. The family held each other, not crying, not shouting, just exhaling deeply, like for the first time in months, they finally allowed themselves to believe that things might actually be okay. But Emily didn't know yet. This was only the beginning. Around 1 a.m., her phone started buzzing. A message from Lucas, her best friend since high school. "Emily, wake up! You're trending everywhere." Still half asleep, hands trembling, she opened her phone. Notifications flooded the screen. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all lighting up like alarms. Jenna, the young journalist from the other day, had reposted a video captured by a passerby. That moment, Matthew Nolan stood by her art table, handed her the check, and walked away amid the cheers. Her original blog post was no longer just a blog. Major outlets were now quoting it. Hollywood icon helps young artist fight cancer in the most unexpected way. The girl who paints to survive, and the man who believed in her art. Just a painting. Number A future. The video hit 1 million views in just 3 hours and kept climbing. Under every article, thousands of comments poured in. "I want to buy a painting from this girl." "My child is going through chemo too. This story made me cry." The world needs more people like Matthew Nolan, but even more, it needs people like Emily. Please share her email. I want to order a piece, any price. Emily sat in the dark, staring at the glowing screen. It didn't feel like her life playing out. It felt like a movie someone else had written. But then, an email made her sit up straight. Subject, Gallery Inquiry, Manhattan Modern Art Collective. The message was short, but enough to make her stop breathing for a second. "Dear Emily, we've been following your story. We believe art is not just in technique, but in the heart behind it. We'd like to invite you to participate in next month's group exhibition at our gallery in New York. If you're interested, please respond as soon as possible. Warmly, Evelyn Ross, curator." Emily stared at the screen, not blinking, not believing. A gallery in Manhattan? A place she once dreamed of just visiting as a spectator, now calling her by name as an artist? She laughed, a raw, broken laugh in the middle of the night, part disbelief, part joy, part exhaustion. Then she cried, not because of the check, not because of the viral video, but because, for the first time in months, she no longer felt like she was falling. She was standing. And that strength wasn't some miracle handed down. It came from her own hands, from every brushstroke, from every choice not to give up, even when her entire body screamed to stop. The next morning, as the sun rose, Emily walked into the hospital. She carried her treatment file and the check, all the costs for her next round of chemo, paid. Every prescription, every consultation, every sleepless night her parents once carried, now just paperwork. She walked down the familiar white hallway, but this time her steps were light. She wasn't there as a patient filled with fear. She was there as someone still fighting, but now walking towards something real, something bright. A few days later, when she returned home and opened the mailbox, a thin envelope lay waiting. No return address, just 3 handwritten words. From MN. Inside was a thick ivory card, a handwritten letter. Blue ink, bold strokes, slightly slanted, clear and deliberate. "Emily, your story reminded me that some things are still worth fighting for. Some people, even the very young, carry strength others spend a lifetime trying to find. Don't stop. Don't just paint to survive. Paint to exist, to tell the world what it needs to hear. I'll be waiting for the next one. MN." Emily folded the letter, held it to her chest, eyes misty, but her gaze clearer than ever. And that night, as the city slept, she turned on the light, picked up her brush, and began to paint again. Not out of fear, not just to survive, but because now she knew she had something to say. 1 month later, the gallery on 11th Avenue was packed. On the pristine white walls, the works of young artists hung in neat rows, each with a name, a title, and a short story attached. But in one corner of the room, where the lighting was softest, there was a large frame hung lower than usual, eye level, so viewers didn't just see it, but stood before it like standing before a whisper. It was the first painting Emily had ever sold. Black and white, a still desert landscape, and a lone figure in a cowboy hat, back turned to the viewer. The space inside the painting felt frozen in time, but anyone who had sat in front of it long enough knew it wasn't silence. It was choice. A quiet way of saying, "I'm still here." Beneath the frame, a small plaque, simple but weighty, read, "From the personal collection of Matthew Nolan." No fanfare, no celebrity branding, just a silent period, enough to make people stop a little longer than they usually would. Emily stood from a distance, tucked against a corner wall, an oversized blazer draped over her shoulders, a plastic cup in hand, untouched. The crowd didn't recognize her at first, and she liked it that way. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there for her painting, for her story. And because, for the first time in her life, it was all real. She remembered the night she wrote her name on the submission label, not with that old voice in her head. "Will anyone even care?" But with something steadier. "This is the path I chose." Orders still came in every day. Her inbox stayed full of painting requests, but she didn't paint out of fear anymore. Now, she painted to live fully, not just to survive. After the exhibition that night, Emily returned to the small apartment her parents had finally been able to rent again after years of saving. One corner of the living room had become a tiny studio, an easel, color palettes, warm lighting, and a little Bluetooth speaker playing soft jazz. She brewed tea, opened the window, and sat down in front of a blank canvas. Before placing the first stroke, she opened a drawer and took out a letter. An old one, folded neatly despite being read dozens of times. Blue ink, strong slanted handwriting. "Don't just paint to live. Paint to exist. To tell the world what it needs to hear." She smiled. The brush touched the canvas. The first color, deep indigo. And there, under the soft glow of a desk lamp, in a quiet room no one knew about, in the middle of a loud city, a new painting began to be born. Not for money, not for fame, but because a young woman who once feared she had nothing left, now had an entire life's worth of stories to tell. We often confuse help with saving. But sometimes what a person needs isn't pity, it's someone willing to stop, listen, and believe in the value they hold. Matthew Nolan didn't save Emily. He simply did the one thing many have forgotten. He saw her not as a girl fighting cancer, but as an artist, as a human being. And maybe, in this world, timely belief is a kind of miracle too.